Hi guys, Chris here with Vital MX. Today we're out at State Fair and we're doing something different in the form of a test. We're out here today with Galfer brake systems. They brought a few things for us to test. We are starting with the 2021 KX450, which has a very good brake system, a very neutral linear brake system. Not overly sensitive on the front or not excessively powerful on the end, just a very smooth brake throughout. What we're gonna do today is we're gonna start fully stock, and then we're gonna use the Galfer Tsunami brake rotor, which has little cuts in it, at a 270 millimeter, which is the same size as stock. We're then gonna go up to a 280 millimeter with the Tsunami rotor. We're also gonna try some different pads and a different brake line. And the goal of today is to basically map out what a brake system is gonna feel like. So if you're not fully comfortable with yours, or if you just maybe desire something a little bit different from your brake system, we're gonna try to give you a few different options of how you can change that and make it specific to you. So join along with us and hope we can get you pointed in a direction. If you have recently listened to the Vital MX podcast, Inside Line, you may have heard Sandro Malesi talk about Galfer and some of their products. So here today, Sandro Malesi.
Yeah, thank you so much. The goal today was to put in practice a little bit of what we learned through the podcast, getting your bike stock set up, riding it a little bit, and then starting to do progressive changes. Necessarily, a lot of these changes, they don't become what you end up riding on, but it gives you sort of a platform of where you can go towards,
Right now, Sandro and Mike, they are changing the front rotor to the Galfer floating wave rotor, and then the rear to the Tsunami rotor. So we're going to get that mounted up, head out, and see how that feels. The stock rotor is floating, but what's the difference? Because there was a very big difference between going from the Galfer wave rotor, that is a floating rotor, and the stock rotor. Both the same size, neither of them have the Tsunami cuts in there, but the Galfer wave rotor did have a significantly different feel. About halfway in through the lever, about 50% pull on, was a lot different than the stock rotor. Why would that be?
Well, stock rotors are, they're, like you said, they're called floating because there are two pieces to it, but it's not a true floating. It's mostly a semi-floating, we would call it, where one of the two components, the carrier and the outside friction, does move. But on the Galfer rotor, it's a true full floating, and that means that the rotor moves left to right, but it also grows, and as it gets, as it expands, it can also contract, where a stock rotor won't do that. You probably also felt a big difference on how the brake pad progressively got on the brakes, and it's because our rotors are not stemmed, they're laser cut, and they're also double disc ground. So that means that the left and the right side of the rotor, they're ground at the same time. So when you have a brake pad applying to the rotor, the amount of contact between the rotor is much higher than the stock rotors are,
So what we did, we just came back in after our first change. We changed the front rotor to the Galfer floating wave rotor, rear rotor to the solid mount Tsunami rotor. The way this differed from the stock, you still have the same progressive feel when you grab the lever, where it's a soft bite. It's not something that's super aggressive right away, but it's a soft bite into the rotor, and right around maybe 20-30%, just before halfway on the lever, that's where the power on that rotor starts to ramp up a little bit more than stock. Feedback is a little bit better, again, right around that mid-lever pull. And then from there, as you squeeze in tighter, the rotor and brakes just respond a little bit better than what the stock one does. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna throw on a 280 millimeter rotor. So we still have stock lever, master cylinder, of course, stock brake line, and we're going with the 280 Tsunami rotor. Should give us a little bit more power, a little bit better feel.
What I always tell people is that the Tsunami design, as it comes into the brake pad, it's basically shaving off a lot of material on the brake pad. So, it does wear brake pads a little bit quicker. But the other thing that we were able to gain with that cut on the inside, it's the translation of the feel on the brake lever. So just like you said, you almost can see what's going on the bottom without actually looking at it. It gives you that confidence when you go like, I'm almost at lockup point, or I need to back off a tiny bit, or I still have a little bit more depth that I can go to. It's because the leading edge of the brake pad now, it's being aggressively hit by a brand new cut, which is the cut that the Tsunami has, and it translates very rapidly up on top on your lever. You're able to go like, oops, almost there, and I got plenty more, or it's just a different feel.
All right, so we just came in off the track with the 280 millimeter floating Tsunami front rotor. The main difference in feel between the 280 Tsunami and the 270 just standard floating is going to be just after the initial grab. So because we're still keeping the same pads through all the test, the initial bite, so once you touch the brake and the pads touch the rotor, that bite is going to be about the same. The Tsunami, the 280 millimeter, ramps up significantly from a 270. Just the initial pull, the first 5%, 10% of lever pull, feels like there is an increased 20% in rotor grab or power, I should say. Now, one of the things with the 280 rotor, because there is so much more power behind it with every little bit of lever pull, going into the corner when it's a little bit dry, but just before they water it, it's a little bit dry, you'll hit these little patches and the wheel does want to lock. There's a little bit of a pull as you go in. So it does take a little bit more concentration going in if traction isn't ideal. With the 270, a lot of times I'm grabbing as much as I can, everything I can give it just to get the bike slowed down enough. With the 280, you don't really have to do that. You're not having to use as much effort to get the bike slowed down at the same rate. All right, so next we're going to go out. We're in Galfer right now. They're installing their steel braided brake line on the bike. So we're going to have the Galfer sintered brake pad, Galfer 280 millimeter Tsunami floating rotor, and the Galfer stainless steel line. And this is kind of the creme de la creme of brake systems. It's the best of all of them.
In our setup, our steel braided brake lines is a tube that has 72 lines of braid. The inside is made out of Teflon. It's called PTFE 64 Teflon. And not to get too technical, but basically the temperature on the Teflon that we use can go very high, up to 400 plus degrees, and it will not do any sort of expansion up to that point. With the brake lines, what we're looking for is to be able to give the rider that confidence on the brake lever that, a lot of supercross, motocross teams, when we've set them up, they say, wow, this lever is like gone from night and day, But some other guys that go like, wow, this is really touchy. So their riding has to adequate to that new setup.
All right, so we just came in off the final test for the day, and this was adding the steel braided brake line to the braking system. What this did from stock was give a much more positive feel. So if you can imagine, you have your pad, you have your lever, and then the brake line in between. If you have a line that flexes to, say, a rubber hose, or even the stock one, which I was told really isn't a steel braided, the more flex in that line is going to give you that squish at the lever. So with the steel braided line, what you're getting is more positive feel. As you're pushing in on the lever, it's moving everything as one. So there's a lot more positive feedback that's coming in through the lever. So in addition with the 280 Tsunami rotor, there's a lot of feedback that comes from all the little cuts on there. We have the sintered brake pad, and then the stainless steel line. So you still retain some of the Kawasaki's linear braking ability. And a lot of that is coming from the caliper and the master cylinder. The piston size and where stuff is at in those two units kind of help to dictate that part of the feel. At the end of the day, my setup that I really liked was 280 millimeter Tsunami rotor. So you get a lot of power behind your braking system.
Short seat distance, lots of power.
Stainless steel line, because you get an immediate feedback, and there's a lot of feedback into your lever. But then the neutral pad, which kind of tamed down just that initial bite. So, I do feel that if maybe I had the race ceramic sintered pad, that probably would have pushed this setup over the limit for me.
If you're just needing to change something and get a good brake system, something better than stock, going to 270 from stock to a Galfer 270 as discussed, with different materials and floating and non-floating and whatnot, and just a good set of brake pads, that's already a really good starting point, And then, if you're gonna have the control environment like you have here on the racetrack, 280, might be a good goal as well, you know.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for coming out. You know, we had a great test. I learned a lot. Hopefully everybody, you know, watching this, you learn a lot and you're able to figure out if there's something you're missing from your brake system, maybe something you want more out of your brake system, a few areas and things that you can try. For more videos, follow Vitamex.com, go to YouTube, click subscribe, and thanks for joining us.